Dr. Farid Fata was a hematologist-oncologist whose name became synonymous with medical betrayal. Operating multiple clinics in Michigan under Michigan Hematology Oncology, PC, and a diagnostic business called United Diagnostics, Fata targeted patients for profit, often giving chemotherapy and other treatments to perfectly healthy people. His actions were not occasional lapses in judgment. They were deliberate, systematic, and devastating. Fata's operation spanned cities including Rochester Hills, Troy, Bloomfield Hills, Oak Park, and Sterling Heights. Over the years, he diagnosed patients with cancer they did not have and subjected them to aggressive chemotherapy, iron infusions, human growth factors, PET scans, and other procedures, all billed to Medicare and private insurers. Federal investigators later documented that he administered more than 9,000 unnecessary treatments to at least 553 patients between 2007 and 2013. Many patients left his care physically weakened, psychologically scarred, or dead. The human toll was staggering. Patients suffered loss of teeth, severe pain, chronic fatigue, infections, and organ damage from toxic drugs. Families described financial ruin from medical bills, broken relationships, and years of emotional trauma. Some survivors testified that they were told they were terminal when in fact they were healthy. Others endured cycles of chemotherapy far beyond medical necessity. It wasn't just the body that was harmed. Trust, the foundation of medicine, was shattered. Warnings about Fata began years before his arrest. In 2010, oncology nurse Angela Swantek interviewed at one of his clinics and immediately recognized patterns that violated standard care. She reported prolonged infusions and unnecessary treatments, but her concerns were initially ignored by licensing authorities. While her early warning went unheeded, it later became a critical piece in understanding how the scheme persisted. The breakthrough came from George Kermit, Fata's clinic practice manager. By 2013, Kermit had seen the fraud firsthand and filed a Katam lawsuit with the federal government. He also provided evidence that prompted the FBI to raid Fata's clinics on August 6, 2013. During the raid, staff were observed attempting to hide or destroy patient files, underscoring the scale and premeditation of Fata's crimes. Kermit's actions finally forced law enforcement to intervene and begin the process of halting the abuse. Investigators revealed that Fata's fraud was extensive. He submitted approximately $225 million in claims to Medicare and private insurers, with Medicare paying out roughly $34 million. Part of his scheme involved accepting kickbacks from a hospice and home healthcare provider in exchange for patient referrals. Money laundering charges stemmed from a movement of these ill-gotten gains into personal accounts and business operations. He had transformed his medical practice into a profit-driven enterprise, exploiting both patients and the healthcare system. In August 2013, Fata was arrested. The federal case presented him with overwhelming evidence. The unnecessary treatments, fraudulent billing, kickbacks, and money laundering. Facing certain conviction, he pled guilty in September 2014 to 13 counts of healthcare fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to pay or receive kickbacks, and 2 counts of money laundering. During sentencing, Judge Paul D. Borman described the crimes as breathtaking in their scope and cruelty. On July 10, 2015, Fata received a 45-year federal prison sentence, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The court also ordered forfeiture of $17.6 million gained from his criminal activities. Victims, prosecutors, and advocates highlighted the need for accountability, noting that Fata's greed had caused physical, emotional, and financial destruction on a massive scale. Fata expressed remorse at his sentencing, claiming he had misused his talents due to greed and a desire for control. Many victims found his words hollow. Patients recounted entering the clinic healthy and leaving weakened, enduring pain and fear for their lives, while families mourned loved ones who had been misdiagnosed or overtreated. The betrayal cut deep because medicine is built on trust. Restitution efforts have attempted to compensate victims, but no amount of money could erase the suffering caused. Civil lawsuits continue, and the impact of Fata's crimes lingers in Michigan communities. The case also prompted regulatory scrutiny and discussions on how to prevent similar abuses in oncology practices nationwide. Dr. Farid Fata's story is a stark reminder of the potential dangers when medical authority is exploited for profit. It highlights the importance of whistleblowers, diligent oversight, and patient advocacy. While the legal system ensured Fata would never practice again, the physical, emotional, and financial scars left on hundreds of patients remain a chilling testament to what can happen when greed replaces care. How would you react if you found out your doctor was intentionally harming patients for profit? Comment your thoughts below and stay with us. We're about to uncover another shocking case of a doctor whose patients didn't survive his care. Case number 2, Dr. Martin MacNeil. Dr. Martin MacNeil appeared to have it all. A respected physician, a practicing lawyer, a father of 8, and a Mormon bishop in Pleasant Grove, Utah. To friends and family, he was accomplished, devout, and devoted. But behind that facade, he was a manipulative and calculating man whose actions would destroy the life of his wife and fracture his family forever. The setup began with Michelle MacNeil, his wife. In the weeks before her death, Martin pressured Michelle into undergoing cosmetic surgery, insisting she get a facelift despite her reluctance. She complied, placing herself in a vulnerable position during recovery. While she was incapacitated, Gypsy Willis, a woman Martin had brought into their home and presented as a nanny, waited in the wings. According to prosecutors, Martin's planning was methodical. He had created the circumstances that allowed him to act without immediate suspicion. On April 11, 2007, Michelle, 50, was found dead in the bathtub of their home, just 8 days after the surgery. Martin called 911, but his behavior was alarming. He was yelling at the operator, attempting CPR in a performative way while his clothes were dry, and creating the appearance of a panicked husband. First responders found her unresponsive, and the death was initially ruled natural, a complication of surgery or a heart attack. To authorities at the time, there was no clear evidence of foul play. Michelle's death would not be accepted as natural by her family, particularly her daughter Alexis Summers. Alexis was a medical student at the time, later becoming a physician, and her medical knowledge gave her insight into the drugs her father had administered. When she saw the combination of painkillers, Valium, and sleeping medications in her mother's system, she recognized that the cocktail was lethal and deliberately designed to suppress breathing. Alexis' expertise allowed her to articulate why her mother's death did not make sense, and her persistence forced authorities to reopen the investigation. Meanwhile, Martin's pattern of deception extended beyond Michelle. He had fabricated serious medical conditions, claiming cancer and multiple sclerosis, in order to elicit sympathy and conceal his true motives. He even engaged in identity fraud with Gypsy Willis, using his children's social security numbers to open accounts and hide financial activity. And in 2007, just as the murder investigation began to take shape, MacNeil was charged with sexual abuse of one of his daughters. Prosecutors later stated that these charges were the first domino, keeping him in custody while they meticulously built the murder case. Evidence revealed that Martin had deliberately drugged Michelle after the surgery and left her in the bathtub to drown. Prosecutors argued this was not a crime of opportunity, but one of planning and calculation. The combination of drugs, the timing after surgery, and his insistence on her procedure all pointed to premeditation. Gypsy Willis, though involved peripherally, was positioned in his life to step in after Michelle's death, underscoring his intent. The trial, which began in October 2013, drew national attention. Fellow inmates testified that MacNeil had admitted to killing his wife, detailing how he administered the drugs and staged her death. The defense questioned the credibility of these testimonies, but the totality of evidence, including Alexis' expert observations, financial motives, and behavioral inconsistencies, proved overwhelming. In November 2013, MacNeil was convicted of first-degree murder for Michelle's death and obstruction of justice for lying about the circumstances surrounding it. The sexual abuse conviction, which had initially kept him in custody, underscored his broader pattern of criminality. In September 2014, Judge Derek Pullen sentenced him to at least 15 years to life for murder, with additional consecutive sentences for obstruction and sexual abuse, effectively ensuring he would not see freedom for decades. Throughout the trial, MacNeil maintained his innocence, filing appeals that argued jailhouse informants had testified falsely. Despite this, his convictions were upheld, and he remained incarcerated in the Utah State Prison. The system had closed the legal loop, holding him accountable for the meticulously orchestrated crime that had claimed Michelle's life. On April 9, 2017, MacNeil's story reached a grim conclusion. He was found unresponsive in the prison greenhouse, having rigged a natural gas hose to end his life. At 61, he died before serving his full sentence, a final act of control over a life that had already wreaked havoc on his family. In death, as in life, he evaded full accountability, leaving the family to grapple with grief and betrayal. The case of Dr. Martin MacNeil is a stark illustration of calculated deceit and abuse of trust. He used his professional authority and personal influence to manipulate, endanger, and ultimately kill. It was only through the persistence of his family, the medical insight of Alexis, and the work of investigators that justice was achieved. Yet, even with conviction, the legacy of Martin MacNeil's actions remains in the trauma left behind, a chilling reminder that appearances can conceal the darkest motives. Case number 3, Conrad Robert Murray. Conrad Robert Murray was a cardiologist whose name became infamous due to his role in the death of Michael Jackson. Born in Grenada in 1953, Murray trained in medicine and built a career in the United States, working in private practice in cities including Houston, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. Nothing in his professional record predicted the global controversy that would erupt in 2009 when he became the personal physician to one of the world's most famous entertainers. In early 2009, as Michael Jackson prepared for his This Is It concerts in London, he sought help for severe insomnia. Murray was hired to manage Jackson's medical care, agreeing to be on call around the clock. The singer's sleep difficulties were extreme, and conventional treatments had failed. Murray began administering propofol, a powerful anesthetic meant strictly for surgical settings, in Jackson's bedroom. He did so without the proper monitoring equipment, oxygen support, or emergency resources, basics required for safe anesthesia administration. On June 25, 2009, Murray found Jackson unresponsive in his bedroom. What followed was a series of missteps that became central to the prosecution. Murray delayed calling 911. Paramedics were not summoned for nearly 20 minutes. During this time, he allegedly made personal phone calls and was reported to be on the phone with his girlfriend, even as Jackson's condition was critical. When he did perform CPR, it was on a soft bed rather than a hard surface, an error that no cardiologist would make, highlighting either panic or incompetence. Meanwhile, Murray attempted to conceal evidence of his actions by hiding vials and other drug paraphernalia before paramedics arrived, demonstrating consciousness of guilt. Jackson was rushed to Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. The Los Angeles County coroner later ruled the death a homicide from acute propofol intoxication combined with other sedatives. The scene in the mansion painted a picture of reckless disregard. For bags, empty vials, and scattered drugs indicated a physician had ignored standard protocols and prioritized convenience or financial considerations over patient safety. In February 2010, Murray was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter. His trial began in September 2011 under Judge Michael Pastor in Los Angeles. Over 6 weeks, jurors heard testimony from 49 witnesses and reviewed more than 300 pieces of evidence. Prosecutors argued Murray was reckless and motivated by ego and financial gain, willing to administer a powerful anesthetic in an uncontrolled environment. The defense claimed Jackson self-administered the fatal dose while Murray stepped away briefly, but the jury found the evidence overwhelming. During the trial, the delay in calling 911, the improper CPR, and the attempts to hide drug vials were presented as proof of negligence and guilt. The prosecution emphasized that Murray's actions violated every standard of medical care. He had allowed a patient to be alone under the influence of a powerful anesthetic, delayed emergency response, and then attempted to cover up evidence of his wrongdoing, all while holding the title of a trained cardiologist. After less than 2 days of deliberation, the jury convicted Murray on November 7, 2011, of involuntary manslaughter. He was handcuffed in the courtroom and taken into custody without bail pending sentencing. On November 29, 2011, Judge Pastor sentenced Murray to the maximum allowed under California law for years in jail. The judge described his actions as a horrific violation of trust and a cycle of horrible medicine. The defense had requested probation, arguing Murray would endure lifelong shame and lose his medical license. But the judge rejected this, stating the sentence needed to reinforce accountability for egregious breaches of patient care. Murray served his sentence in a Los Angeles County facility, and due to jail overcrowding and credit for good behavior, he was released on October 28, 2013, after serving roughly 1 year and 11 months. He permanently lost his medical licenses in California and Nevada, effectively ending his medical career. Beyond the courtroom, Murray's case sparked a global conversation about the ethics of celebrity medical care. The Jackson family pursued civil lawsuits for wrongful death, while media and public discourse highlighted the dangers of providing powerful medications outside of proper clinical settings. Murray himself continued to assert partial innocence, publishing a memoir and making media appearances defending his decisions, though the criminal conviction remained the definitive legal judgment. Dr. Conrad Murray's story is a cautionary tale of how medical authority can be abused. By administering propofol in a non-clinical setting, delaying emergency response, performing ineffective CPR, and attempting to conceal evidence, Murray violated the trust inherent in the doctor-patient relationship. His conviction illustrates that even fame and wealth cannot shield a physician from accountability when their actions result in preventable death. Michael Jackson's death, and the series of errors surrounding it, stands as a reminder of the potentially deadly consequences when medical expertise is misapplied or ignored. Case number 4, Christopher Duntsch. Christopher Daniel Duntsch was a neurosurgeon whose brief career in Texas would become one of the most infamous cases of medical malpractice in American history. Between 2011 and 2013, patients came to him seeking relief from chronic pain or spinal problems, only to leave permanently injured or dead. Dubbed Dr. Death, Duntsch became a symbol of what happens when incompetence meets a lack of oversight. Duntsch held both an MD and a PhD, but his formal credentials masked a critical deficiency. During his residency, he spent most of his time in a research lab, focusing on his PhD rather than hands-on surgery. While a typical neurosurgery resident performs roughly 1,000 operations, Duntsch completed fewer than 100 before entering independent practice. This lack of surgical experience left him without the muscle memory or technical skill required to safely perform complex spine surgeries, explaining why his failures were so frequent and catastrophic. He began practicing in Dallas, Fort Worth hospitals, first at Baylor Regional Medical Center at Plano. Among his earliest victims was Jerry Summers, a friend who trusted Duntsch to relieve chronic cervical pain. During surgery, Duntsch severed critical arteries and spinal structures, leaving Summers quadriplegic. Complications eventually contributed to Summers' death. Another patient, Kelly Martin, suffered a fatal injury when Duntsch cut a major artery during what should have been a routine back procedure. These outcomes, while alarming, did not immediately stop him from moving to other hospitals. Despite mounting injuries, Duntsch often resigned rather than being fired. This loophole allowed him to secure privileges at Dallas Medical Center, where his destructive pattern continued. In July 2012, Floella Brown suffered a fatal stroke when Duntsch severed her vertebral artery, and Mary Efford, then 74, experienced permanent nerve damage and massive blood loss from improperly placed implants and screws. It was Dr. Robert Henderson who later performed salvage surgery on Efford, describing Duntsch's work as the product of a child who had never been in a surgical suite. Alongside Dr. Randall Kirby, Henderson's repeated complaints to the Texas Medical Board were instrumental in halting Duntsch's career. Evidence also revealed disturbing insights into Duntsch's mindset. He sent an email to his assistant and girlfriend, Wendy Young, stating he was ready to leave the love and kindness and goodness and patience that I mix with everything else that I am and become a cold-blooded killer. This chilling message suggested not only awareness of his destructive behavior, but also potential impairment from drugs and a deteriorating mental state. By mid-2013, the Texas Medical Board suspended his license, noting that his lack of competence posed a continuing threat to patients. Investigators identified that out of roughly 38 operations performed in about 18 months, 31 patients were permanently injured. His surgical errors included severed arteries, misplaced screws, lacerated nerves, and retained surgical sponges, mistakes that required multiple corrective surgeries by other specialists. Many survivors face paralysis, incontinence, chronic pain, and a lifetime of medical care. The legal case focused primarily on Mary Efford's surgery, which left her severely disabled. Prosecutors charged Duntsch with injury to an elderly person, a felony that reflected the seriousness of the harm. Additional counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, represented by surgical instruments, were considered, highlighting that his repeated failures were more than negligence. They were criminally reckless. During the 2017 trial, testimony from victims, families, and surgeons painted a harrowing picture. Doctors Henderson and Kirby described the extent of Duntsch's errors, recounting the horror of entering surgical fields to repair catastrophic mistakes, misplaced implants, severed blood vessels, and damaged nerves. The combination of survivor testimony, emails to Wendy Young, and the physical evidence of Duntsch's surgeries made the prosecution's case overwhelming. After deliberating for only 4 hours, the jury convicted Duntsch of the felony charge of injury to an elderly person. At sentencing, the court imposed life in prison with a minimum of 30 years before eligibility for parole, reflecting the magnitude of his crimes and the permanent harm inflicted on his patients. The Duntsch case revealed serious systemic failures. Hospitals allowed him to operate despite repeated catastrophic outcomes, and credentialing systems failed to flag a pattern of harm. Many colleagues had warned administrators, but institutional inertia enabled his reign of terror to continue for nearly 2 years. Survivors described lifelong consequences, while surgeons who repaired his mistakes expressed shock at the extent of the damage. Today, Christopher Duntsch remains incarcerated at the O.B. Ellis Unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, unlikely to be released before 2045, when he will be in his mid-70s. His story is a grim cautionary tale about the dangers of unqualified practitioners, systemic oversight failures, and the devastating human cost when a physician's arrogance and incompetence intersect. The moniker Dr. Death may seem sensational, but for the dozens of patients he permanently injured or killed, it is a sober reflection of reality. How could a surgeon with a license to operate leave so many patients maimed or dead? Comment below what you think went so wrong, and stay tuned. We're about to reveal the chilling story of another doctor who abused their power. Case number 5, Michael Swango. Michael Joseph Swango was a physician whose career became one of the most notorious examples of a medical professional turning lethal. Born on October 21st, 1954, Swango was academically gifted, earning both a medical degree and later a PhD, but beneath his intelligence lay a disturbing fascination with death. He collected scrapbooks filled with images of horrific car accidents and Nazi atrocities, reflecting a compulsion not only with patient mortality, but with human suffering as a hobby. This double life mentality would foreshadow the horrors to come. Swango's dangerous tendencies first surfaced during his internship at Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983 to 1984. Nurses noticed that patients often fell gravely ill while he was on duty. In one instance, he injected a patient with an unknown substance, raising suspicions among staff. Despite repeated warnings, hospital administrators conducted only a cursory review, and Swango was allowed to continue his internship. His poor evaluations later blocked him from completing a standard residency, highlighting the systemic failures that would enable him to operate undetected for years. Even before completing his residency, Swango committed murder. In January 1984, he administered a lethal potassium injection to 19-year-old Cynthia and McGee, a gymnast recovering from an accident. Potassium is a preferred weapon for killer doctors because it causes cardiac arrest that can appear natural and dissipates quickly, leaving minimal evidence. McGee's death was not immediately linked to foul play, allowing Swango to continue practicing. After Ohio State, he returned to Quincy, Illinois, and worked as an EMT with the Adams County Ambulance Corps. Here, the first paradox of his career emerges. Despite being a convicted poisoner, he was allowed into positions of trust. Swango began poisoning colleagues, often by slipping toxic substances into coffee or food. When multiple coworkers became seriously ill, he was caught, arrested, and convicted of aggravated battery in 1984. He received 5 years in prison, a warning that failed to prevent future atrocities. Upon release in 1989, Swango returned to medical work using forged documents and a new identity, David J. Adams, to secure positions. He eventually entered a residency in psychiatry at State University of New York at Stony Brook, which placed him at the Northport Veterans Affairs Medical Center. There, the pattern repeated. Patients and staff fell mysteriously ill, and at least 3 patients, Thomas Samarco, George Ciano, and Aldo Surini, died after receiving injections from Swango. Toxicology later confirmed poisoning. Swango's reach extended overseas. While working at Neen Lutheran Mission Hospital in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, patients again began dying under his care. Local authorities charged him with poisoning 7 patients, 5 of whom died. Swango fled the country before authorities could detain him. The arrest that finally ended his mobility came in June 1997 at Chicago O'Hare Airport, thanks to the persistent efforts of a DEA agent and a postal inspector who refused to let the case go. Swango had attempted to enter Saudi Arabia for a doctor's job using forged credentials. The arrest marked the beginning of the end for a career built on deception, murder, and systemic oversights. In 2000, Swango pled guilty to 3 counts of murder at the Northport VA and admitted to killing Cynthia and McGee. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never again practice medicine. Swango's career highlights shocking systemic failures. Despite a prior conviction for poisoning coworkers, hospitals, licensing boards, and residency programs repeatedly allowed him back into positions where patients' lives were at risk. Investigators later determined that of roughly 60 patients and colleagues he is suspected of killing, only a fraction could be definitively confirmed. Many deaths were initially attributed to natural causes or medical complications, showing how his methods exploited gaps in oversight. Swango's fascination with death, coupled with his intelligence and medical training, allowed him to manipulate systems and colleagues. He administered poisons in ways that were difficult to detect, often mimicking natural illnesses. His victims spanned multiple states and countries, and he used charm and credibility to deflect suspicion. The sheer audacity of continuing to practice after convictions and multiple suspicious deaths highlights both his audacity and institutional failures. Today, Swango is incarcerated at ADX Florence, a supermax prison in Colorado, in extreme isolation for his own protection. His case remains a cautionary tale in medical ethics, credentialing, and oversight. The Swango story demonstrates how intelligence, ambition, and a fascination with death can combine with systemic failures to produce catastrophic outcomes, and how persistent investigators, like the DEA agent and postal inspector, ultimately prevented him from claiming even more victims. 6. Josef Mengele. Josef Mengele, infamously known as the Angel of Death, was a German physician whose name became synonymous with some of the most horrific human experiments in history. Born March 16, 1911, in Günzburg, Germany, Mengele earned a medical degree and a doctorate in anthropology. Early in his career, he developed a particular interest in genetics, twin studies, and eugenics, obsessions that would define his atrocities at Auschwitz. In 1943, Mengele was assigned to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Nazi concentration and extermination camp. As an SS officer and camp physician, he wielded almost unlimited authority over prisoners, especially Jews and Roma. He was not only responsible for selecting which prisoners would be sent directly to the gas chambers, a staggering number estimated in the hundreds of thousands, but he often roamed the camp independently, searching for specimens for his experiments even when off-duty. Mengele developed a particular obsession with twins, believing that studying them could reveal the secrets of heredity and racial purity. Approximately 1,500 sets of twins passed through his hands. He subjected them to extreme experiments, injections, amputations, blood transfusions, and exposure to pathogens. Fewer than 200 individuals survived these procedures. Some of his work involved deliberately infecting children with diseases, including pneuma, a gangrenous bacterial infection common in malnourished populations. He documented the disease's progression in Roma children, ignoring the starvation and unsanitary conditions he had imposed, using their suffering to prove racial inferiority. His cruelty extended to physical and psychological experiments as well. Mengele collected body parts, including eyes from victims with heterochromia, which he pinned to his office wall like butterfly specimens. He also performed unnecessary surgeries and injected chemicals that often caused death or permanent disfigurement. Prisoners were deprived of nutrition, exposed to hypothermia, or poisoned with substances that mimicked disease. Mengele's authority and the camp's lack of oversight meant that his actions went unchecked, leaving survivors physically and emotionally scarred. Even his selections were performed with calculated detachment. He decided life or death with a gesture of his hand, sending children, the elderly, and families to their deaths while isolating twins or other specimens for experimentation. His obsession with race, genetics, and physical anomalies drove him to prioritize scientific curiosity over human life, turning medicine into a weapon of ideology and terror. Despite the scale of his crimes, Mengele was never captured during the war. In 1945, as Nazi Germany collapsed, he fled west, moving through Germany, Austria, and Italy before ultimately settling in South America, living in Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. Authorities issued warrants and investigated sightings for decades, but Mengele evaded arrest through forged documents, secret networks, and careful relocation. For decades, he lived a hidden life, often under false identities, and remained aware of his notoriety. Mossad, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and other Nazi hunters attempted to track him, but he successfully avoided capture. He eventually died in 1979 in Brazil, drowning during a swim, though his identity was only confirmed later through forensic examination. Mengele's legacy is measured not only by the death toll he directly caused, but also by the lifelong suffering of survivors. Twins, children, and adults endured amputations, chronic pain, and permanent disability. His calculated, detached demeanor turned medical authority into a tool of mass murder. Even survivors decades later recall his precision and calm during selections and experiments, which amplified the horror of his cruelty. His case demonstrates how ideology, unchecked power, and the veneer of science can be weaponized to dehumanize and destroy. Mengele's obsession with genetics, twins, and heterochromia His documentation of NOMA progression and the staggering number of selections he performed highlight both the breadth of his crimes and the chilling mindset behind them. Museums, survivor testimonies, and historical scholarship continue to ensure that Josef Mengele's actions remain a permanent warning of the dangers of abusing medical knowledge and authority. Dr. Kermit Gosnell. Kermit Baron Gosnell was a Philadelphia-area physician whose medical practice became one of the most disturbing criminal cases in recent U.S. history. For decades, he operated the Women's Medical Society Clinic on Lancaster Avenue in West Philadelphia, a facility later described as a house of horrors. Gosnell's crimes included illegal late-term abortions, reckless medical practices, distribution of controlled substances, and the murder of infants born alive during abortion procedures. His conviction exposed a decades-long failure of oversight that allowed these atrocities to continue largely unchecked. Gosnell was born on February 9, 1941, and earned his medical degree in 1966. For years, he built a reputation in Philadelphia's low-income communities as a provider willing to serve patients who could not afford care elsewhere. His patient base was almost exclusively poor women, many African American, Hispanic, or refugees, such as Karnamaya Mongar, whose death would later become central to his criminal convictions. The grand jury later noted that regulatory authorities avoided inspecting his clinic because it served primarily minority and low-income women, revealing systemic racial and socioeconomic bias. Despite this reputation, Gosnell's practice was a nightmare. When federal and local law enforcement raided the clinic on February 18, 2010, they discovered semi-conscious, heavily sedated patients on filthy recliners, blood-stained blankets on the floor, and cats roaming freely. Investigators also found 47 aborted fetuses and infants stored in freezers, jars, and containers, along with dirty instruments and unsanitary conditions throughout the clinic. Testimony revealed Gosnell's deliberate postnatal killings. During late-term abortions, some infants were born alive, moving, or breathing. Gosnell, or his staff, then performed a procedure he referred to as snipping, which involved severing the spinal cord. An act the grand jury described as execution, not a medical procedure. 3 of these deaths were proven in court, earning Gosnell convictions for first-degree murder. Gosnell's recklessness extended to adult patients. Karnamaya Mongar, a 41-year-old refugee, died in 2009 after receiving heavy doses of sedatives and painkillers, which were poorly monitored. Staff delayed calling for emergency help, leading to her involuntary manslaughter conviction. Other patients suffered severe injuries or near-fatal outcomes from his unsafe practices. Financially, Gosnell was sustained through his drug prescriptions, which at one point made him the 3rd highest prescriber of OxyContin in Pennsylvania. The scale of his pill distribution, often for cash, kept the clinic financially afloat despite squalid conditions. This drug mill operation also contributed to his ability to evade scrutiny, as he appeared to be a successful medical professional on paper. Legal and systemic failures enabled him for years. The Pennsylvania Department of Health did not conduct a single inspection of his clinic between 1993 and 2010, a 17-year gap that allowed his illegal and dangerous practices to continue uninterrupted. Complaints filed over the years went uninvestigated, and oversight agencies failed to connect the dots between unsanitary conditions, illegal procedures, and patient deaths. Gosnell was eventually prosecuted on multiple charges. He was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder for infants killed after birth, 1 count of involuntary manslaughter for Mongar's death, 21 felony counts of performing illegal late-term abortions, and 211 counts of violating Pennsylvania's 24-hour informed consent law. He received life in prison without parole for the murder convictions and an additional 30-year federal sentence for illegal prescription drug distribution. The trial revealed shocking details of his clinic operations. Staff testified to routine unsanitary practices, including reusing medical instruments, inadequate anesthesia, and unlicensed personnel performing procedures. Gosnell's wife, Pearl Gosnell, and other employees were also convicted of crimes related to the clinic. Defense attorneys attempted to argue he provided services to underserved patients, but testimony and evidence overwhelmingly proved reckless criminal conduct that endangered lives. The Gosnell case exposed not just individual criminality, but systemic failures. Regulatory authorities repeatedly ignored warning signs, and long-standing gaps in inspections allowed him to operate unchecked. Oversight agencies failed to enforce medical laws when the patients were primarily poor, minority women, highlighting a disturbing intersection of negligence, bias, and inaction. Gosnell remains incarcerated at State Correctional Institution, Huntington, in Pennsylvania. His case serves as a grim reminder of the dangers of unchecked medical authority, the human cost of systemic failure, and the devastating impact when profit, ideology, or bias supersedes patient safety. For decades, vulnerable patients paid the price, and only after his conviction did the scale of his crimes become fully visible. Genene Jones. Genene Jones was a licensed vocational nurse in Texas whose crimes left an unknown number of children dead. Born July 13, 1950, she worked in pediatric care at hospitals and clinics in San Antonio and Kerrville in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Over years of employment, an alarming number of infants and young children died or suffered unexplained medical crises under her care. Prosecutors believe she may be responsible for up to 60 deaths, though only a few were ever proven in court due to missing records and destroyed documentation. Jones began her nursing career in 1977, first working in the pediatric intensive care unit at Behar County Hospital. During her shifts, an unusually high number of children experienced sudden respiratory failure, seizures, or cardiac arrest, often when she was present. Colleagues later described her as showing an unusual mixture of anxiety and pride. She would sometimes intervene in emergencies to perform CPR, seemingly to earn praise from doctors. This pattern fits a recognized psychological phenomenon known as hero syndrome or Munchausen by proxy, in which a caregiver creates or encourages a medical crisis to appear heroic by resolving it. Despite internal concerns, the hospital never disciplined Jones. When administrators eventually asked nurses to resign en masse to reduce litigation risk, they failed to investigate the high rates of infant deaths. After leaving Behar County, Jones took a position at a private pediatric clinic in Kerrville, Texas, where the pattern continued. Children there suffered unexpected medical emergencies, including seizures and respiratory distress, and some died under suspicious circumstances. Jones frequently used succinylcholine, a powerful muscle relaxant that paralyzes every muscle, including the diaphragm, while the patient remains fully conscious. For infants, this meant they were effectively conscious but unable to breathe, a particularly horrifying method of killing. One notable case involved Chelsea McClellan, a toddler whom Jones injected with succinylcholine in 1981, resulting in her death despite emergency efforts. Jones was eventually arrested and tried. In 1984, she was convicted of murdering Chelsea McClellan and sentenced to 99 years in prison. She was also convicted of injuring 4-week-old Rolando Santos by administering an unsafe dose of heparin, receiving an additional 60-year sentence to run concurrently. Despite these convictions, authorities suspected her involvement in dozens of other deaths, but thousands of pounds of pharmacy and nursing records had been shredded at Behar County Hospital shortly after Jones left, likely to protect the institution from liability. This destruction made additional charges nearly impossible for decades. Her incarceration also revealed a legal loophole. Under the Texas Mandatory Supervision Act, Jones was legally required to be released in March 2018, a prospect that alarmed prosecutors and families. To prevent her release, authorities worked quickly to find new evidence linking her to older cases. In January 2020, Jones entered a plea agreement for the 1981 murder of 11-month-old Joshua Sawyer, receiving a life sentence that ensured she would remain behind bars well into old age. Investigators and medical experts testified about the effects of her actions. Drugs like succinylcholine and heparin, when misused, can cause respiratory failure, cardiac arrest, and hemorrhaging, especially in infants. Evidence strongly suggested that Jones deliberately induced medical crises so she could intervene and appear heroic, combining her hero syndrome with lethal intent. Even decades later, Jones's crimes remain chilling because of their scale and the systemic failures that allowed them. Hospital administrators, record-keeping failures, and lax oversight enabled repeated harm, while families of victims struggled for decades to obtain justice. The true number of children harmed or killed by Jones may never be known, with prosecutors estimating that she was responsible for up to 60 infant and child deaths across multiple facilities. The case of Genene Jones remains a grim example of how a healthcare professional's access to powerful medications, psychological manipulation, and systemic negligence can result in repeated tragedy. It also highlights how the destruction of evidence, regulatory gaps, and legal loopholes can allow a predator to avoid accountability for years, leaving the most vulnerable, children, at risk. Families, investigators, and medical experts continue to study her case as a cautionary tale for hospitals, licensing boards, and caregivers. 9. Harold Shipman. Harold Frederick Shipman was a British general practitioner whose name became synonymous with one of the most chilling abuses of medical authority in modern history. Born January 14, 1946, in Nottingham, England, Shipman trained at the University of Leeds before beginning his medical career in the early 1970s. For decades, he built a reputation as a trusted family doctor, known for his calm demeanor and apparent compassion, a facade that hid a decades-long killing spree. Shipman's modus operandi was methodical. He administered lethal doses of diamorphine, a powerful opioid, to patients who often showed no medical need for it. Many of his victims were elderly women living alone, chosen because their deaths would not immediately arouse suspicion. After administering the drug, typically during home visits, Shipman would falsify medical records and death certificates, making the deaths appear natural. This combination of medical knowledge, authority, and careful record manipulation allowed him to evade suspicion for years, even as the death toll mounted into the hundreds. Despite early warning signs, Shipman's crimes were almost entirely overlooked. Colleagues and community members noted unusually high mortality among his patients. Deborah Massey, a local undertaker, and Dr. Linda Reynolds, a fellow physician, raised concerns about the death rate, but their warnings were dismissed by authorities. It wasn't until 1998, with the suspicious death of Kathleen Grundy, an 81-year-old widow and former mayor of Hyde, that the investigation gained traction. Grundy's will have been altered to leave her estate, worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, to Shipman. When her body was exhumed, toxicology revealed lethal morphine levels, inconsistent with her reported natural death. Shipman's arrest on September 7, 1998, marked the beginning of legal reckoning. At his 1999 trial, the prosecution presented evidence connecting him to the deaths of 15 women between 1995 and 1998, alongside forgery charges related to Grundy's will. On January 31, 2000, Shipman was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery, receiving 15 life sentences with a whole life order, ensuring he would never be released. The broader scope of his crimes emerged through the Shipman Inquiry, led by Dame Janet Smith. By examining decades of medical records and mortality statistics, the inquiry concluded that Shipman had likely murdered at least 218 patients between 1975 and 1998, with suspicions surrounding many more. The victims were predominantly elderly women, about 80% of his victims, and most had died at home or in his care, giving Shipman the ability to administer fatal doses of morphine without immediate detection. His method was horrifyingly systematic. Shipman would visit a patient at home, inject them with diamorphine, then later certify the death and complete the paperwork. Families and coroners generally trusted his explanations, as the deaths appeared consistent with natural causes. Shipman's authority as a doctor, combined with systemic weaknesses in death certification, allowed him to kill with impunity for decades. Psychologists and investigators have debated Shipman's motive. Some suggest he derived a disturbing sense of control and power over life and death. Others speculate that observing his mother receive morphine in her final illness may have shaped his fascination with administering the drug. Whatever the reasoning, his actions reveal a chilling abuse of medical trust, turning care into murder. Shipman's downfall was ultimately driven by greed and overreach. The altered will of Kathleen Grundy, a combination of financial ambition and continued deception, triggered the investigation that finally ended his reign. Police exhumations and toxicology confirmed what had long been suspected, leading to the criminal convictions that revealed only a fraction of his true body count. On January 13, 2004, Shipman was found hanged in his prison cell, the day before his 58th birthday. His suicide was controversial. It deprived families of direct testimony, leaving many questions unanswered, and also allowed his wife to receive his full NHS pension, a loophole that sparked public outrage. In death, Shipman retained a final measure of control, denying victims' families the full measure of justice. The legacy of Harold Shipman is a stark warning. His crimes exposed how medical authority, when combined with systemic oversight failures, can be abused to devastating effect. Reforms in death certification, patient record auditing, and oversight of general practitioners in the UK were implemented in response. But the shadow of Shipman's actions remains a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of patients and the potential for trust to be exploited. He remains one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history, not through physical violence in the public eye, but through a cold, calculated manipulation of medicine itself. Case number 10. Anthony Joseph Garcia. Anthony Joseph Garcia was an American physician whose career ended in a shocking trail of murders. Born June 7, 1973, in Los Angeles, California, Garcia earned his medical degree from the University of Utah in 1999. He began what should have been a professional path in medicine, but repeated conflicts with supervisors and volatile behavior soon derailed his career, sowing the seeds of a deadly vendetta. Garcia's early medical life was marked by instability. He entered a residency in family medicine at Bassett St. Elizabeth in Utica, New York, but resigned after 6 months for unprofessional conduct. Later, he joined the pathology program at Creighton University Medical Center in Omaha, Nebraska, only to be fired in June 2001 after repeated clashes with faculty, including Dr. William Hunter and Dr. Roger Brumbach, over his behavior and competence. His repeated professional failures, combined with a sense of humiliation and grievance, would eventually fuel his deadly acts. In March 2008, Garcia committed his first known murders. He broke into the Omaha home of Dr. Hunter and his family. That night, Garcia stabbed Hunter's 11-year-old son, Thomas, and the family's housekeeper, Shirley Sherman, to death. The motive was clear: revenge against Hunter, who had been one of the key figures in Garcia's firing years earlier. For years, these killings remained a cold case, baffling Omaha police with no clear suspect or motive. The case lay dormant until May 2013, when Garcia escalated his violence. That year, he had been denied a medical license in Louisiana due to letters from Hunter and Brumbach documenting his past misconduct, a professional rejection that reignited his rage. He broke into the Omaha home of Dr. Roger Brumbach, now elderly, and fatally shot him and his wife Mary. The brutality and precision mirrored the 2008 attack, providing police with the missing link that finally connected Garcia to the earlier murders. Investigators noticed the pattern immediately. The similarities between the 2,800 killings and the 2013 Brumbach murders, entry points, methods, and targeting of specific households, allowed detectives to re-examine old files. For the first time, the cold case from 2008 was linked to an active suspect, creating a chilling picture of a doctor-turned-serial killer driven by revenge and professional resentment. Garcia's arrest came July 15, 2013, during a traffic stop in Union County, Illinois. Police reported that he was intoxicated at the time, reportedly celebrating or possibly preparing for another attack. His GPS included addresses of other doctors' homes. He was taken into custody and held without bail, with investigators linking him to all 4 murders through forensic evidence, timelines, and his movements in Omaha during the attacks. The trial began in October 2016. Prosecutors argued that Garcia had committed all 4 killings with premeditation, motivated by professional humiliation and personal vendetta. Evidence included the striking similarities between the 2008 and 2013 crimes, his prior conflicts with the victims, and forensic links placing him at the scenes. Witnesses included colleagues who had interacted with him during his residency and law enforcement officers who investigated the murders. Garcia was found guilty on all counts, including 4 counts of first-degree murder, as well as additional charges for weapons possession and burglary associated with the attacks. In September 2018, a 3-judge panel sentenced him to death, making him one of the few physicians in U.S. history to receive capital punishment for serial killings. Appeals have followed, but his sentence remains intact. Unlike other physician criminals whose victims are often patients, Garcia targeted the families and associates of those he resented, children, spouses, and housekeepers included. His attacks were calculated, personal, and deeply vindictive, reflecting a cold desire for revenge rather than opportunistic violence. Investigators have noted that the gap between 2008 and 2013 represents a dangerous interlude, during which Garcia appeared dormant but was harboring grievances and preparing for future attacks. The timeline of Garcia's crimes spans over a decade and multiple states, highlighting how personal vendettas, professional rejection, and unaddressed mental instability can escalate into deadly violence. Early warning signs, including repeated residency failures and documented hostility, were insufficient to prevent his later killings. Today, Anthony Joseph Garcia remains on death row at the Tecumseh State Correctional Institution in Nebraska, where he awaits execution. His case serves as a chilling reminder that a medical license does not guarantee ethical behavior, and that unchecked resentment and unaddressed behavioral warning signs can transform a physician into a methodical killer. The Omaha community remembers the victims: Thomas Hunter, Shirley Sherman, Roger Brumback, and Mary Brumback, as innocents caught in the crossfire of professional vengeance. How could a trained doctor turn from healer to killer, targeting the very families he was supposed to respect? Comment below what you think drives someone to commit revenge at this level. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of the most shocking criminal cases.